Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm delighted today to be joined by Auditi Chakravarty, who is the CEO of the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund, also known as AERDF. Auditi, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's always great to have people who I've worked with professionally on the pod, because I feel like we already have, the great thing about Kaplan connections is there's a nice kind of collegial vibe that many folks achieved within that work culture. So I think that's where we overlapped. So I feel like you're kind of friends or friendly with other people who worked within the Kaplan mothership. So I always love to have people from that phase of my career back on. We always start with folks' origin story, so we get to know you first, and then we'll get into more of the work side and the stuff you're trying to accomplish at AERDF. But can we start with your story, and then we'll dig into some of the work that you and team are doing?
Yeah, sounds great. That origin story includes Kaplan. I'll tell you a little bit of the story leading up to that. So I consider myself a lifelong educator. I was a high school English teacher for several years before I pursued a path in curriculum development and product development in the curriculum and assessment space. And so that included working in publishing and places like Kaplan, where I really learned about instructional design and curriculum development and its intersection with young people who are preparing to take large-scale assessments, right? So I got to learn a lot about the assessment market and space and assessment design and psychometrics and all these things, words that I never knew before.
You had me at psychometrics. So
I know an awful lot about psychometrics because after I left Kaplan, I ended up going to College Board, where I led development.
You moved upstream.
That is exactly right. Yeah, that was actually one of the things. I went from being on the side of helping prepare students for the test to saying, I can go and be part of the organization that's actually making those tests. And I think the thing that really interested me about that, because I came from a background as a teacher and as somebody developing curriculum, is I came to understand how much power and influence the tests themselves had on taught in school. And the advanced placement program was going through a major redesign to overhaul its focus on skills, developing skills and competencies. And
you're on the other side of a successful kind of revival of the AP program. Like, it's always been with us, but like its primacy, has kind of, it's been pushed a little more front and center.
Yeah. I mean, the AP program is constantly evolving to ensure that it's meeting the needs. As a lot of things are changing, but that was, I think, a big initial phase. And it included, for instance, big new AP programs like the AP Computer Science Principles course, which I led the design of, or AP Seminar and Capstone, which became these AP's first foray into project-based and performance-based work. And so that all, was really, really important, both for helping me learn the space of assessment development and psychometrics, but also, put into practice things I really believe in about the importance of centering learners and students and their interests and goals in the context of the work that they're doing. And to get college credit for that is really cool, right? And the kinds of things they do in an AP Seminar course or AP Computer Science Principles course, it's really great that kids can pursue their interests and get college credit for those, for the rigorous work that they do.
And a related trend lately is dual enrollment, which we're seeing more high school students who are looking to pursue college level courses actually at, like, say, a community college or something nearby. And the success of AP has almost been an indicator to folks that, there's really a need here and there's an opportunity to kind of, through the power of assessment, ideally, open up professional growth opportunities for folks who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity, especially as the assessments, to your point, become more skills relevant and job relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think the connection to dual enrollment, and it's interesting you made that point. I think the connection is this idea that we want students to have multiple pathways, right? And that idea that there are different pathways to get to where they want to get, and that college is on that pathway. It's an important part of that pathway, but there are different versions of that for students based on what they want to do, right? So I think that's where, the diversity and variety of AP courses and assessments plays in, as well as dual enrollment for sure. And then in addition to my work leading AP, I launched the pre-AP program, which is really about ensuring that all students have the opportunity to take coursework that's going to prepare them for
Right.
AP so that they can show up prepared. Opening up access to AP was really one of my
Mm.
overriding goals and priorities during my time at College Board. I also then went on to lead research and psychometrics. There's that word again from before. I actually led research in psychometrics and learning for the organization so that
Right.
I got a chance to also dip my toe into the most recent redesign of the SAT program that's now gone fully digital. So I helped to lead that work. So, I was at College Board doing those things, and I was so committed, as I said, to access and ensuring that all students were getting these opportunities to pursue pathways and that obstacles were being removed. And I think a lot of the policies that we were advancing at College Board were very much focused on that. But I really came to understand that we need more than that. We need in the, system and the K-12 education ecosystem, we need more of a commitment to research and development and evidence that are produced and driven by a goal of making sure that all students get the best possible learning experience for them, and that we need more R&D, more targeted R&D. And that was kind of, an overriding of how I thought about a lot of the work that we were doing at College Board when I learned about this organization called the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund, which was setting up to do R&D in a completely different way. And after all the work that I'd done in my career, it just felt like the perfect match to the things that I'd worked on and also the kind of impact that I wanted my work to have. And so here we are.
And congratulations. And it does make sense. And we'll hear a little more about AERDF in a moment here. But what time frame are we talking about? Because the years pass like decades these days. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
The years passed. 2 years ago. It was 2 years
Okay.
ago.
Got
Yeah.
it. So
Almost exactly. Yeah.
got it. So kind of the new normal post-pandemic, just the beginning of we were shaking the cobwebs off of things and kind of settling into a new normal, although it feels like we are now disrupted yet again, but maybe that is the new normal, is that things continue to get disrupted. But maybe a little more on AERDF, like what specifically you do there, the mission, the vision, and some of what you got going on.
Yeah. So AERDF launched as an organization is many years in the making. So yes, I joined a couple of years ago, but AERDF was formally launched in 2021. And the work to launch it began even a few years prior to that, when our founders came together to realize that there's a kind of research and development that's really normal in other industries and other spaces. You see it in biotech, you see it in DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, that the government supports, that enables a kind of R&D that's at the very edge of knowledge and science and technology and practice. And the fact is that in education R&D, so much of our R&D has historically been incremental. It's been very siloed. So there's research that happens over here, and then there's development that happens, in a separate silo from that. And teachers in the schools and students are rarely engaged in that process of R&D, if at all. If they are, it's usually as subjects of research, not participants in the work. And so, the question was, can we model and demonstrate what this kind of an organization can do if we model ourselves on that kind of the advanced research project agencies, where we bring a cross-sector of scientists, technologists, and educators together to do R&D together through multiple projects that are all kind of working toward unlocking a breakthrough in a particular area. So AERDF operates programs. So right now we have 4 programs. Each program is targeted at a big opportunity or problem in the K-12 education space, where we're asking the question, if we could unlock a particular piece of knowledge, some new science, some technological capability that doesn't currently exist, could we change the status quo? Could we change the trajectory?
Are you going to make me say AI? Aditi, do I have to say AI first? But AI is a great example, right?
AI is a great example. We can talk about it. I can actually tell you about each of our programs, and certainly, AI is an example within one of them. But that's really the aim. And AI is a great example of both a technology that exists and also one that can be applied to unlock things that will
Mm.
actually change what happens in classrooms, right?
Yeah.
Or change how you design or build assessments, or change what we assess. There's a whole host of ways that it
What
could
was
actually shift things.
Yeah, what was probably most striking to me about ChatGPT and the LLMs, but really ChatGPT specifically when it came out, was how much it was already a cognitive tutor. And as someone who'd kind of been in the space for a long time, I was kind of struck by, wow, this is going to be like massively available to everybody. Everybody suddenly has a capability that was, prior to that, gated through probably like a learning platform somewhere. Like people generally didn't have mass access to a tutor in their pocket. And like, as someone who worked in education for a while, I understood how not only is this technology transformative, but it's almost a direct hit on some pretty relevant educational use cases. And that's why understanding how to connect that then to science, because I feel like there's a risk that in kind of the hype cycle and research, in the hype cycle, it's easy, Sam Altman, I imagine, is going to be bullish on the breakthroughs and the valuations of the future of AI. Whereas when you think about it from an education and educational research perspective, there's a lot of research now on kind of how to manage how much technology should be added and how to think about like professional ethics and, data privacy and some of these other things where all that stuff, I imagine, would be within AERDF's purview.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many directions you could go in what you just said, but I mean, I'll just start with really simply where you started, right? One of the fundamental research questions is ChatGPT, is generative AI a great tutor in your pocket? Because the fact is that tutors don't hallucinate or spit out false information,
I mean,
which
I worked at Kaplan for 23 years. I was at Kaplan, so the majority of them don't. I would agree. Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
majority of them don't. But that itself needs to be tested. It needs to be built, right? So there's an opportunity for R&D to see how we can take the technical capacity and capability of AI to build better tutoring
Right.
applications with that, which a lot of folks are doing, right? So that is an example of the kind of work that folks are already doing. I think that where I might distinguish our AERDF focus is we are taking a 3 to 5 year view. And so we're looking at what needs to be proven or unlocked now so that in 5 years, what's happening looks really different, right?
Yep.
And so, there's a lot of folks who are doing incremental R&D, and there's an important place for that to say, like, here's what exists now. How can we improve this one piece of it?
Yeah.
We start by going more out to the edge of what are all the things we know and are able to do right now? What does a learning science tell us right now when it comes to math learning or executive function? Or what are the limits of our current technology when it comes to being able to deliver self-assessment as an example, something you mentioned earlier? And we look at and we try to really understand what that edge is and say, what's keeping us from going farther, right? What is keeping us in that status quo where we always assess the same way or we always use that technology the same way? And if it's a question of learning science or testing a technology application that is the thing that's keeping us from that, that's where AERDF programs will focus, right? And so that's I think the difference in some of what we're doing in our programs is it's always at that intersection of the science and the technology. And then recognizing that if we want to shift practice in classrooms and not only build new tools, we do. I mean, new tools obviously come about, but that's not the goal. If the end goal is to ultimately ensure that we're building tools that are useful and usable and high impact and can shift practice in classroom, we have to include the teachers and the students in that process of the R&D itself, right? They will ask different questions. They'll say right up front, it's sitting at the design table, they'll be able to name, it's never going to work if you do it this way, because here's the reality of the classrooms that we're dealing with, right? So that is a really critical piece as well. But the goal is to still think about, okay, so what is the 5-year vision of where we're trying to get to? And that distinguishes us from the kind of business as usual R&D that we tend to
which is more like iterative. There is at least a phase within the AI revolution, which is about automation and efficiency and kind of optimizing how things operate with the emerging technology. And I think we're kind of almost through that phase. And that's why the research is getting more interesting now around like rigor and scale. I've also heard folks say we're moving from an innovation phase to more of an engineering phase now, where the technology has been out in the field long enough that there's a lot of experimentation and people can kind of build different types of solutions off of some of the, again, speaking of AI, some of these like foundational layers that are emerging. That's opening up a lot of opportunity, but it's still relatively new. Like we're within 2 years. So that's where what is the research actually saying about this stuff is extremely relevant. And then focusing specifically on K-12 and its impact, both the challenges, but also there's a lot of upside opportunity when you think about AI connecting to the work that teachers do, especially if you start extending into that longer strategic horizon. Interestingly, I was talking to someone recently who was on an NSF grant looking at where AI would be by 2040, which is even further out there. And what was interesting there is there was kind of an inversion of the AI would actually be focused on facilitating how humans interact with each other. Because one thing we have learned coming out of the pandemic and even a lot of the mental health issues that are emerging as an epidemic is that we are actually human beings who need to be physically connected, which is also what, the role of the teacher, I think, is very central to a lot of what you're talking about. And then maybe we could just go quickly, the programs themselves. You want to quickly hit on what they are?
Yeah, I'd love to. And in fact, I'll start with our newest program, the one we just announced, because it's exactly where you were going. It's taking us exactly into this conversation, which is our newest program called AugmentEd, which is entirely about the role of the teacher and what the classroom of, near future is going to look like, where AI is an enabler of the learning environment and the teaching experience and the learning experience for students. And so, think about it this way. You were talking about how so much of the focus on AI, certainly as it pertains to teaching and learning, has been about how AI can drive efficiency, right? So automation and efficiency. And obviously the AI can drive automation and efficiency. And we see a host of examples of how it's being used to do that. The next horizon really is, how can it augment the experience, whatever the experience is? And for us, this really interesting question of, given the very, very human nature of learning, very social nature of learning, the importance of the relationship, as you said, between the teacher and the student, or among different students in the classroom. What is the role that AI is best suited to play in that environment that enables the teacher to teach things they wouldn't otherwise be able to teach, or allows the students to try things or do things that they would otherwise not be able to do? And how can we, through R&D and in our program, the teachers will be really leading on the conceptualization and design, and they'll be partnered with researchers and technologists to kind of design and test and iterate.
Co-design is the word that's showing up everywhere. And it is interesting when you do a podcast like this, you talk to folks across the ecosystem, especially in K-12. There's a lot more talk about, who has a seat at the table, and then even how far you go, in terms of teachers, but then also the students themselves, and then extend to their families and the community. It does seem like there's more of an awakening around like, okay, if you are thinking about co-design, like who are you co-designing with? And then how do you do it in a way that is truly empowering to them, as opposed to, there's a lot of implicit dynamics about doing research around like who knows what.
Oh yeah, the power dynamics are huge, right? I mean, when a researcher walks into a classroom and like, I'm a researcher with a PhD from a university, and they say to the teacher, I want you to partner with me, there's an implicit, often a very implicit power dynamic there that might otherwise limit that teacher's voice or agency in that space. And so, our programs do actually in the beginning do the work to address that right off the bat.
Because trust is a pretty fundamental issue nowadays, and people don't necessarily trust. They don't trust a platform. They don't necessarily trust AI. It depends on who you are. But if you're someone who has not had wonderful interactions with technology, if technology has been kind of hounding you your whole life, Are you immediately going to jump in and start experimenting with this stuff? Are you going to say, that ain't for me? That's actually a role that research can play, where you can actually start to validate what works. And then to your previous point, like what doesn't work? Like what are some of the places
Exactly.
where the research is
Exactly.
pointing against that use case?
That's right. That's a really important piece of our work, is to communicate and share broadly what works and what doesn't work. And so,
Mhm.
as far as AugmentEd, one of the goals is certainly that by putting teachers in the driver's seat of the work, including teachers who are at all different comfort levels and familiarity levels, they don't have to know the AI or the research, because we're going to pair them and partner with them with those experts. But
Mhm.
what they do know is teaching and their classrooms and what their students need and what they
Right.
need and what they want to push to in terms of
Yeah.
the learning environment they want to create. And so through that, they'll be able to create tools and test them, and we'll be able to learn what
Mhm.
works, what doesn't. And then we'll be able to extract themes from across all of those things to
Yeah.
really understand and contribute to what's going to be a growing body of knowledge. I mean, as you said,
Right.
it's been a couple of years and there's a lot of work that's happening, and we will be able to continue to shape that and contribute to that while pushing forward into this view of the augmented, AI augmented classroom.
Well, congratulations on the launch of that. I think a lot of my listeners are probably interested in doing research in this space. There might be founders, it's pretty overwhelming trying to keep up. So a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are doing so to try to do some sense making around the AI revolution. If folks want to do more, they want to learn more about what's going on there, what should they do?
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be looking for folks to partner on this program, on all our other programs. So go to our website, www.aerdf.org. And there you can find what are the newest opportunities and opportunities for educators to join our work, for researchers. And if nothing else, sign up for a newsletter and get a newsletter every month, and you'll find out about what we're learning and what the opportunities are that are emerging.
That's good. Yeah, because there's a significant curatorial problem now where it's like, where do I go for information? Where do I go for trusted sources? And then you're a trusted source who also then funds research as well, right? And then reports back on it. So like that's an important thing, I think, for folks to understand. It may be a little early on AugmentEd, but then there are other research programs that have been out there for a little while, others that are coming. 2021 is relatively recent, so it's kind of a new effort here. What are the other areas? And, similarly, folks should go to aerdf.org to find out more about all of this. But what are the other research programs that you're working on?
Yeah, I'll name them quickly. I might specifically talk about a couple because we're going to sharing over the coming months. So our first program was EF plus math. EF stands for executive function plus math. That actually launched before 2021. It was the original AERDF program that existed before there was an AERDF. It was kind
Nice.
of the demonstration of what it looked like to do this work
It's
together.
like the OG. I believe that's referred to as the OG.
It is the OG. That is the popular and common term for it. And EF plus math is doing R&D to discover and unlock how understanding, measuring, and strengthening executive function skills in the context of teaching math can actually increase and improve both dimensions and understanding the relationship between those things for, students in the grades 3 through 8. And EF plus math is in its final phase of work, has one round of pretty significant research still to go with 3 different project teams who are all doing really interesting testing of what they've done over the last 5 years with EF plus math. We're going to be sharing a bit in the coming months about what we learned from our phase 4. And then about a year from now, we'll be able to see what the final results are from each of the three projects that are in this last phase. So that's EF plus math. And then our 2 other programs that I'll mention, both of which we're going to be sharing some pretty significant reports in the coming months. One of them is Assessment for Good. Of course, given my own background in Assessment for Good was something that was really, really exciting to me coming to AERDF, that we're doing this really interesting work to answer questions about how we can better understand the core levers that support and drive student learning. So, we talk a lot about students' math skills or literacy skills, but there's a set of attributes and skills that sit underneath that, such as executive function skills or a student's sense of self-efficacy, or a student's sense of belonging in a classroom, just as a few examples, right?
Yep.
So if we can better measure and understand those components and do so really seamlessly and throughout the experience of teaching and learning. You talked earlier about self-assessment, and that's exactly it. If we want teachers and students themselves to really get to understand what's going on in terms of their readiness to learn, how they're performing day to day, we want those assessment moments to be frequent and therefore seamless with the kinds of activities that they're doing in the classroom. And so Assessment for Good is doing really interesting work to redefine the assessments themselves, but also to test innovative new technology for delivering those assessments, right? So getting at the cutting edge of both I'll use the word again, the psychometrics of the assessment, the math of how we measure, and also the technology through which those are delivered so that you can get enough information. And of course, that includes leveraging AI, both leveraging AI for the development of those assessments, but also to make sense out of what we're learning. And so we're really looking to shape the future of assessment. And in fact, we'll be sharing more about what we're learning and the kind of future that might be enabled, later on this year.
As an ex-Kaplan podcast host, I am looking forward to a returned engagement to go deeper on that when the timing is right. And you do know with your third appearance, you qualify for a Trending in Ed refrigerator magnet. So by that point, you'll be 2/3 of the way home. But I know there's one more program that we wanted to hit on, correct?
Yeah. So our last program that I'll talk about is our program Reading Reimagined. And, Reading Reimagined I've been talking about it a lot lately because it's so top of mind because so many people have been talking about NAEP scores. And, we just talked about assessment that looks at those skills that support student learning. And we also know that we need really good measures of literacy skills and math skills.
I've heard that reading is fundamental.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, it is. And so Reading Reimagined is focused, unlike where I think a lot of our focus and conversations right now about the science of reading really focus on K-3, because those are the critical. That's when we teach kids
oh
to
my
read.
God. As a parent of a first grader,
I know.
Right, speaking directly, I'm snap clapping. Yes, I'm with you.
Yeah, exactly. So your child's probably a pretty good reader, right?
Yeah, he's doing all right. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I think that that's what we want, right? We want for children by the time they get to second, third grade to have a pretty good mastery of reading. But the fact is that about a third of students, they get past third grade, and more than a third of students, they get past third grade, they still haven't mastered that kind of foundational level of literacy skills. And we don't systemically have great ways of measuring or responding when a fifth or sixth grader is missing foundational literacy skills. Right? And so Reading Reimagined has been focusing on unlocking, how can we better define and then measure? And by better measure, that means, more efficiently, more quickly, and still maintain the same quality of information that we get from the measurement. And then also, once we have that information, intervene with really, really well-researched, grade appropriate, culturally appropriate,
context appropriate.
Context appropriate kinds of interventions. That's what they're really focused on unlocking. And Reading Reimagined has about 1.5 years left in their program, and they've learned a ton. They funded a lot of research that we are going to be sharing later on this year, actually, that later this spring. We're going to be releasing an insights report from the Reading Reimagined program again.
Wow. Yes.
Our website is a great place to get access to that. I would also recommend for folks, if they want to be up on what we're doing, follow us on LinkedIn. Because we share when new reports come out, new research is coming out, we share those things there. And it's a great place to kind of keep up to speed on what we're doing and what we're seeing in the world of R&D.
That makes sense. And unlike DARPA, which I think was shrouded in mystery somewhere in the Pentagon and who knows where else, you actually want people to engage and you want people to find you and understand the research. That's part of why you're here. So we covered a lot of ground. And if folks just want a few takeaways here based on what we talked about, Aditi, what would you send them home with?
I think one really, really important point that I just really want everybody to take away right now is that education, teaching and learning there's a science behind them. This is a scientifically based. People think about that when it comes to, biology or AI or whatnot, and we forget that that's also true of education. And
Mhm.
so when we're trying to support and improve a scientifically based domain, R&D is critically important to that. And that's just something that I think is just important to stay in the conversation. It's why I'm really glad that you had me on so that I could talk about this,
Yeah.
because I do think that people often forget about that, right? They forget about that because the hard work happens in the classroom. It's
Mhm.
in the classroom between the teacher, as I was, the student, the child. There's a school system around that to support and enable that. But that system needs behind them, sitting behind them,
Mhm.
an ecosystem that is evidence-based, that is focused on making sure that what the school has, that what the teacher has, that what the students have is as high quality, as well tested, as relevant as possible, and that really, really centers what it is that they need to be successful. And so, that's my takeaway from all this. I am always, always just so deeply grateful for everything that teachers do every day. And my hope is that through our work, that we're able to enable and empower them to achieve much greater success with their students.
Amazing stuff here with Auditi Chakravarty, who is the CEO of AERDF, aerdf.org. Check them out. They have a newsletter as well, and a lot of really interesting, relevant research coming down the pike, covering some really relevant domains, whether it's AI, future of assessment, the science of reading, relevant topics for educators, for parents, for people who care about the future of education. Auditi, thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thank you so much, Mike.